Well, today we come to the end of our summer series, and we've been talking this summer about community. And it's certainly been interesting. I said early on that these quarterlies are written, sometimes the contributions are made a year ahead of time, and nobody could have expected what we've been going through during this summer. And the idea of community is that we do have neighbors, and we've looked at different stories from scriptures about who our neighbors are and how we need to look at those neighbors and how we need to interact with neighbors. And nobody could have anticipated the challenges that we're going through right now, but it's certainly been a time that we can reflect and we can think about what it's like to look through the world and look at our neighbors as Jesus would look at them. I also want to remind you that the new series, the fall series, will start next week, and it's titled Encounter. And if you haven't picked up a quarterly yet, then be sure, and if you go to the 9:30 service, the outdoor service, they've got them there. They've also got them at the church office, so be sure and pick one up. And it's going to be every bit as interesting as the summer series has been on community. I went ahead and looked at that next week, September 6th, and the purpose statement of next week's lesson is to let go of anger that blocks our spiritual growth and wrecks our relationships in the church. And I thought, it's going to be an interesting week as I prepare for that lesson. But give that some thought. Be sure and pick up a quarterly. Today's lesson is somewhat familiar, and it's certainly a story that we know bits and pieces about. And I think maybe we're going to learn a little bit more as we go through this, because I certainly did as I was preparing the lesson. It's a lesson today it's a very vivid story. It's an eerie story, and we kind of got to read between the lines because it was written in a time when the people of Palestine in the days of Jesus would have been very familiar with the setting for the story and would have had a greater understanding. But it's pretty alien to us because some of the concepts in this story are things that we just don't deal with or that we don't think much about. I also want to, as we get ready to look at this story, go back to Mark 4:35. And in Mark 4:35, this was the passage about Jesus and his disciples were getting to cross the Sea of Galilee, and they encountered a storm, and Jesus was asleep in the front of the boat, and the disciples were scared, and they woke him up, and he calmed the seas, and he asked them and challenged them about their faith because they were concerned. But I think it's important, and I want to say this, I say this often, that as you read a passage, as you look at a lesson, go back and look at the context. Look at the setting for the story, and it helps you understand it much better. So here's Jesus and his disciples. They're continuing to expand their ministry, and that's been the theme for the last couple of weeks. And they leave in late evening to cross the Sea of Galilee. They run into the storm, they calm the storm, they eventually get to where they're going. And when they get there, on the other side of the lake where they are, there's a lot of caves, and there was a lot of caves with limestone rock, and many of the caves were used as tombs. And so you can imagine what that was like. I mean, in the daylight it would be scary, but certainly at night to be approaching all of these tombs, all of these caves. And so it must have been pretty spooky for the apostles when they approached. Now, I want to start reading from Mark 5, and it's 1 through 20 is our lesson today. It says, Jesus and his disciples came to the other side of the lake, to the region of the Gerasenes. As soon as Jesus got out of the boat, a man possessed by an evil spirit came out of the tombs. This man lived among the tombs, and no one was ever strong enough to restrain him, even with a chain. He had been secured many times with leg irons and chains, but he broke the chains and smashed the leg irons. No one was tough enough to control him. Night and day in the tombs and the hills, he would howl and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from far away, he ran and knelt before him, shouting, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Swear to God that you won't torture me." He said this because Jesus had already commanded him, "Unclean spirit, come out of the man." Now that's interesting. It's interesting that here Jesus approaches this man. Now, let me point out that this was clearly a Gentile area. The Jews believed that if you touched a person who was deceased, that it was unclean to do so. So they wouldn't have been around the tombs. They wouldn't have been in this area. So it's clearly a Gentile area. And so out of the tombs, this demon-possessed man comes. Now, it was pretty fitting for him to be there because demons, as they believed in those days, dwelt in woods and gardens, vineyards, dirty places, and lonely and desolate spots, and among the tombs. And so it was also known that the demons would come out at night. It wasn't considered safe to sleep alone in a home with nobody else there. It certainly was not safe to approach somebody in the dark because it might be a demon. So how this man felt so possessed is seen in the way he speaks. Sometimes we see that he uses a singular, he refers to himself. Other times we'll see that he's speaking in terms of other people. He uses a plural term. So it's almost as if he's believing that the demons are speaking for him. Now, let's go on and read. He said, Jesus asked him his name. He responded, Legion is my name, because we are many. They pleaded with Jesus not to send them out of that region. Now, when he said legion, there's probably a couple of reasons for that. Rome had occupied the area, and while this area was a Gentile area, there were Roman troops called legions, and there were over 6,000 troops in a legion. And it's very likely that this man had seen these troops before. It's also known, and we've certainly read stories about that, where these Roman troops would murder, they would pillage, they would take what they needed, and so this man probably saw some of that. I mean, it could possibly be that he had seen that, and he had seen people murdered, and that's why he was relating that these demons inside of him were like a Roman legion. And it's true that the Jews believed that no man could survive with these demons inside of him. There was a Jewish saying that said, a legion of hurtful spirits is on the watch for men. When shall he fall into the hands of one of these things and be taken? So there was this clear feeling that these legions of demons were out to attack people. Now, it's also true that Palestine was an occupied country. And these Roman legions would go in and they, as I said, they'd take what they need. And they would destroy. And so probably this man, in seeing that, it kind of pushed him a little closer to insanity. Now, demon possession was a serious thing. And we also just read that Jesus, evidently a previous time that he got together, that he saw this man, he tried to call the demon out. It didn't work. And so he's obviously had an encounter with this man before. And he's had a previous attempt to heal him. And then Jesus asked what the demon's name was, and the man responded Legion. Now, it was true that the Jewish people believed that if you knew the name of a demon, that took the demon's power away, and when you took the power away, then the demon would give up on attacking you and creating this insanity in you. So Jesus was trying to point out to them, well, what's your name? If you tell me your name, then we'll weaken the demons. So there's a lot going on here. There was a lot going on that was very real to the people in this period of time. And it really doesn't matter if we believe in demon possession or not. We can look at this story and we can say, well, gee, I mean, there's no such thing as demons. There's no such thing as demon possessions. He was just imagining things, and so he needs to get on with his life. But I will submit this to you. Have you ever laid awake at night worrying about something that hadn't happened yet because you thought it was going to happen? That you had this imaginary problem, you had this imaginary challenge that kept you awake. I dare say that you're probably staying awake a lot over the past few months. And so that's really what was going on with this guy. It may have been imaginary, but I think as we read the story, we see that the Lord will even take away something that's imaginary if we put our trust and our faith in Him. This man needed deliverance, whether that deliverance was from literal demon possession or just delusion on his part. So then we read on about the herd of swine. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the hillside. "Send us into the pigs," they begged. "Let us go into the pigs." Jesus gave them permission, so the unclean spirits left the man and went into the pigs. Then the herd of about 2,000 pigs rushed down the cliff into the lake and drowned. So we've heard that part of the story. We remember that part of the story. That these demons supposedly went into these pigs, and the pigs ran off the cliff and they drowned, and the demons were gone. Now clearly this is another reference to the fact that the area was very much a Gentile area. Jews thought of pigs as being unclean. And they were grazing on the hillside, and the man felt that the demons were asking to be sent into the pigs. And he obviously, we read earlier that he screamed and he yelled, and he obviously screamed loud enough that these pigs ran off the cliff. Now, there are people, and I just want to share this. I consulted with Barclay and N.T. Wright, both of their commentaries on Mark, because I wanted to know a little bit more about this. It's always kind of bothered me that Jesus used pigs to cast out the demons, and in the process, 2,000 hogs were killed. And I've talked to other people about that, and it just didn't make sense to me. And Barclay suggested that it was a blind way to look at things if you focus on the pigs and the pigs dying. And he goes on to say, and I just want to read this from his commentary, he said, "How could the fate of the pigs possibly be compared with the fate of a man's mortal soul? We presumably don't have any objections to eating meat for dinner, nor refuse pork because it involved the killing of a pig. Surely if we kill animals to avoid going hungry, we can raise no objection if the saving of a man's mind and soul involved the death of a herd of these same animals." He goes on to say there is a cheap sentimentalism which will languish in grief over the pain of an animal and never turn a hair at the wretched state of millions of God's men and women. Now that is not to say we need not care what happens to God's animal creation, for God loves every creature whom his hands have made. But it is to say that we must preserve a sense of proportion, and in God's scale of proportions, there is nothing so important as a human soul. So then we go on to read, "Those who tended the pigs ran away and told the story in the city and in the countryside. People came to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the man who used to be demon-possessed. They saw the very man who had been filled with many demons sitting there fully dressed and completely sane, and they were filled with awe. Those who had actually seen what had happened to the demon-possessed man told the others about the pigs. Then they pleaded with Jesus to leave their region." Think about that. I mean, I get the part that the people that were in charge of the pigs were upset. They went and told what had happened. They told about, this man who they had seen for decades. They had chained him. He had broken the chains. He was somebody they really didn't want to be around. They were scared of him. And Jesus comes and casts the demons out, puts them into the pigs, and the pigs fall off the cliff. But then there's this paradox in this passage. This paradox that you would think that the people would be in awe of Jesus. You would think that they would be telling Jesus, "Stay with us, show us more of your miracles. We've got other issues, please help us solve those issues. Be attentive to us, Jesus." But they didn't. They said, "Get out of town. We don't want you around. Get away as soon as possible." Now we look at that and we go, well, how? Does that make sense? Would we have done that? But as we consider that and we shake our heads and say, well, absolutely not. How many times have we ever said, "Don't disturb my comfort"? If someone came to us today and said, "I can give you a world that would be better for the mass of people in general, but it would mean you're going to have to give up something. You're going to have to give up some of your comfort for that to happen." Would you want to do that? Or would your response be, "I'd really rather just leave things as they are. I'd really rather just have this nut in the caves and we'll just avoid him, rather than save his soul and take my livelihood away." There's a lot of thought given to what we want our life to be. We talk about new normal. We talk about we don't know what tomorrow's going to be like. But the reality is we don't want our comfort disturbed. But it's certainly divine to be willing to let it be disturbed so that we can share with others. I mean, how many times have we said, don't disturb my possessions? I mean, it's kind of another aspect of the same thing. I read a story years ago about how gypsies, gypsy fortune tellers, and they would go around the countryside, and certainly in Europe that was the case. And that the gypsy fortune tellers had a little secret that they would tell, that young people, they would share with them about various pleasures they were going to have. With older people, they would talk about the possessions that they would have and the comfort that they would get from those possessions, because that's what people wanted to hear. I also have been thinking about, as we've traveled and we navigated this past summer, about different things that we reflect on when we think about our religion. I mean, we've got an idea what we want it to be. And the reality is we don't want people to disturb our religion. We have a certain way that we want to worship. We don't like the way we're having to worship right now. We want to be able to walk in the sanctuary. We want to be able to greet friends. We want to be able to sit down. We want to be able to have music. We want to be able to sing. We want to be able to say the Apostles' Creed. We want to be able to say the Lord's Prayer. We want to be able to hear a message, and we want to be sent home with a blessing. And at all that time, we want to be sitting in our sanctuary because that's where we feel closest to God. We don't want somebody to mess with that. We don't want somebody to mess with what we're used to. We want our activities in the church to be very organized, to be the same, to be what we grew up with. We want to serve on committees. We want to be able to do the things that we're used to doing. We've been talking a lot about the barbecue, and I understand that we're going to have a barbecue in a sense. We're going to be able to be drive-through barbecue, which is going to be great, and I'm looking forward to that. But it's not going to be the same as it was in the past. We want things the same. We want our religion the same. We want a package the same. And we certainly don't want somebody messing with our beliefs. I mean, this is what I believe, and by golly, that's what I believe, and that's what I've always believed, and that's what I'm going to continue to believe. We don't want somebody challenging that. And so much of that was going on here in this story, where it was like, okay, Jesus, you did this, you performed this miracle, but instead of being in awe of that miracle, instead of considering the magnitude of that miracle, we really want you to get out of town because you're messing with the status quo. And so then we go on to finish the passage. And it says, while he was climbing into the boat, the one who had been demon-possessed pleaded with Jesus to let him come along as one of his disciples. But Jesus wouldn't allow it. Go home to your own people, Jesus said, and tell them what the Lord has done for you and how he has shown you mercy. The man went away and began to proclaim in the 10 cities all that Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed. Now the interesting thing about this passage is that it says the setting was the Decapolis. The Decapolis was 10 cities. It was near Jordan, it's on the east side of Jordan, and it was essentially Greeks. And they were beautiful cities. I mean, these people were firmly entrenched in their Greek, what they believed in. They had their Greek gods, their Greek temples, their Greek amphitheaters. They were devoted to the Greek way of life. And so this man who Jesus had ministered to, who he had removed these demons from, came and begged him to spend time with him. And isn't it interesting that Jesus said, no, I've got other plans for you. You need to go back to your people and spread the word. He was to be a witness for Christianity. He was to be a living, walking, vivid example of what Christ can do for a man. We got to remember, and sometimes it's tough, our glory must always be not in what we can do for Christ, but in what Christ can do for us. And the proof of our Christianity is how we relate to our neighbor. I think it's also interesting, I never really thought of this way, but in our quarterly, it talks about the fact that he was really the first seed of what would be an incredible movement that we recognize as Christianity. It's got to start somewhere. It has to start somewhere, and it started with this man. Paul, later on in his writings, referred to him as the first Gentile apostle that was sent back to minister to his people. Jesus said, I know you would like to stay with me, but you need to go back to your neighbors. You need to go back and share the message with them. So we see in this story that Jesus is continuing to expand his ministry, and he's expanded his ministry by sending out a Gentile who was somebody that people didn't want to be around. There couldn't have been a greater example of what Jesus can do. We've been talking about community this summer. We've talked about some familiar stories. I, just being very candid, am probably more disturbed about our community than I've ever been. I see things going on that continue to bother me. I spent last weekend with my parents, and more than once it was brought up, what are we supposed to do? What can we do? And it's a challenge for all of us. It's a challenge for all of us to continue to look at the world through the eyes of Christ. And stories like this help us do that. We have everything to be thankful for. Our very lives were given to us by God. And He has expectations of us. We're not going to agree with everything that's going on. We certainly know that. And we're not expected to agree with everything. But I think it's so important that as soon as we can, we need to start getting back together so we can have open dialogue, so that we can be talking to each other, so that we can be sharing. I run into people during the course of the week. My office is almost next door to the post office in Cornelius. And every once in a while when I walk over to the post office, I'll run into somebody from our Sunday school class, or somebody that I haven't seen in a couple of months. And it's just wonderful. It's wonderful. I ran into Joan last week at the post office, or this week at the post office. We spent 20 minutes just standing there catching up because we hadn't seen each other in a while. And I was so excited to be able to do that. Not that we can't go visit, we can visit with each other. But it's on such a limited, restricted basis. We need to get together. There's a lot going on. We need each other. We rely on each other. We draw from each other. And these little online lessons are a way for us to kind of stay connected. And I appreciate it when I get calls or somebody says that they picked up on something they hadn't thought about before from one of these lessons. But we need to be together, and we're not together. But we will be. I know we will be. It's not easy. God never said it was going to be easy. But God is with us. God is with us every single day. And nobody can take that away from us. And because we recognize that, we have a responsibility to take care of each other, to take care of our neighbors, even when we don't always agree with them. Will you pray with me, my friends? Our gracious Heavenly Father, we come to you today. We come to you today, and we continue to be very stressed. We continue to be disturbed. We continue to be challenged. But we know when we come to you in prayer that we're close to you and you're close to us. And we know that you will answer our prayers. We know that we need to take care of each other. We know that we need to make sure that we continue to spread the word, the good news. As we go throughout this week, we ask that you keep our eyes open to the things that you want us to see, our ears open to the things you want us to hear, and most importantly, our hearts overflowing with that love that you have put in each and every one of us. And always remind us, Lord, that no matter how much we give away, you're going to give us more to give. In His name we pray. Amen. I love you, my friends, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.